Hello, and welcome to the Vermont Report on Palestine-Israel. I'm Mark Hage. When Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently addressed a joint session of the U.S. Congress, he stridently asserted, even angrily asserted, that Israel was not manufacturing a famine in Gaza. And yet on July 9th, after months of warnings by international aid organizations, food experts, activists, and journalists, a team of UN experts declared in a statement that Israel, quote, was responsible in Gaza for an intentional and targeted starvation campaign against the Palestinian people, end quote. It further noted that this was a form of genocidal violence and had resulted in famine across all of Gaza. Our first report tonight was produced by Middle East Monitor, and it looks at the conditions and the consequences of Israel's orchestrated famine in Gaza. It also explores Israel's long use of food as a weapon against Palestinians under occupation and investigates the long-term health and social implications of the famine.
These images shocked the world. On Friday, the 8th of March 2024, aid being dropped into the northern Gaza by Americans, Jordanians, Egyptians, French, Dutch and Belgian air forces killed 5 Palestinians after a parachute failed to deploy. Before the aid drop, another shocking incident took place. On the 29th of February 2024, as hungry Palestinian civilians gathered around food aid trucks in Gaza City, Israel's occupational forces opened fire, killing over 100 people. While many condemned these two events, far less attention has been paid to the reason why Gazans needed and continue to need the aid. Israel has waged a war on Gaza since October 2023. Over 36,550 Palestinians have been killed in that time. Most of the strip has been destroyed, millions have been forcefully displaced, and Tel Aviv stands accused of war crimes and genocide in the International Court of Justice as a result. International organizations, including the UN, have been raising the alarm that Gaza is entering a man-made famine as a result of Israel's complete siege of the Palestinian enclave.
A famine is now imminent in the northern part of the Gaza Strip.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור.
The projections are alarming. A group of British and American epidemiologists have warned that between 48,210 and 193,180 Palestinians will die in Gaza from both war and disease connected to the famine if nothing changes. But what is famine, and why do some fear it could unleash a catastrophe unlike anything we've seen in Palestine so far?
The level of catastrophe, food catastrophe in Gaza is without precedent since the current monitoring systems were set up. The numbers in IPC level 5 are greater than occurred in Somalia in 2011 and any other crisis in recent history.
In 2007, Israel placed the Gaza Strip under a partial siege and restricted access to the Palestinian enclave. The previous year, Hamas beat rivals Fatah in elections, which resulted in fighting breaking out between the two. In June 2007, Hamas expelled Fatah from Gaza, and Israel responded by sealing the Strip off from the world. In 2012, documents released by Tel Aviv's Ministry of Defense revealed that between 2007 and 2010, the Israeli military calculated the number of calories they needed to allow Gazans to consume daily in order to avoid being accused of forcefully starving Palestinians. 2,279 calories per person was worked out and was in keeping with the World Health Organization's guidelines. Israel's guidelines often meant frozen salmon and low-fat yogurt could get into Gaza, but not coriander or instant coffee during this period. Israel routinely tightened and loosened its siege of the Strip over the years. In the documents, Israeli officials remarked they were putting Gaza on a diet. The purpose was to keep Gaza above starvation whilst destabilizing the Strip. In 2011, US diplomatic cables leaked by WikiLeaks contained a quote from an Israeli diplomat who said they wanted to keep Gaza's economy on the brink of collapse. After Hamas's attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, the Israeli Defense Minister ordered Gaza to be placed under total siege. Nothing was to get in and out of the Strip. Stopping food from entering was only part of the issue. Israeli forces began destroying civilian infrastructure needed to maintain life in Gaza. Bakeries, markets, stores, shops, factories, storage sites, fisheries, boats, ports, flour mills and farms were among those eviscerated by Tel Aviv. Attacks on hospitals and medical facilities and their destruction not only meant people were unable to receive treatment, but also severely curtailed the Strip's ability to control disease, starvation and other medical issues. The destruction and forced displacement of people from their homes by the Israeli occupational forces has forced over 2 million Palestinians into camps where up to 600 people are forced to share a toilet and running water is not available, leading to the spread of preventable diseases. When Israel allows aid into the Strip, its soldiers shoot at Palestinians trying to collect it. The famine in Gaza is not a result of a natural occurrence nor a byproduct of war. Indeed, as famine expert Alex de Waal shows in his book Mass Starvation, famines as a result of natural causes disappeared by the 19th century, and over the course of the 20th century, all famines were the direct and deliberate result of policies taken. Famine does not happen on its own. It has been deliberately engineered, and so famine is fundamentally a political act. In March 2024, the UN International Court of Justice ordered Israel to lift all restrictions on aid from getting into the enclave and avert the famine. The decision said the court observes that Palestinians in Gaza are no longer facing only a risk of famine, but that famine is setting in. What would famine mean for Gaza? Crisis in Gaza, a scenario-based health impact projection report by the Johns Hopkins Centre for Humanitarian Health and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, published in February 2024, offers a layout for what could happen in the besieged Gaza Strip up until August 2024. Divided into 3 scenarios, which are ceasefire, status quo, and escalation, it calculates excess mortality in the Palestinian territory. Under a ceasefire situation, if we exclude disease, between 4,200 and 11,740 Palestinians will die as a result of their injuries, wounds, and other issues directly related to the war. But if disease is included in these numbers, which is caused by displacement, injury, starvation, homelessness, breakdown in sanitation, over-cramped living conditions, poor hygiene, and lack of health care, the death toll could rise to 80,370. If the status quo persists, meaning the war continues as is, between 48,210 and 72,830 could die by August. But if disease is factored in, this death toll could reach as high as 193,180. And lastly, if Israel escalates its military campaign, excluding disease, Gaza could witness 62,350 to 92,650 deaths. But with disease, this range multiplies to 259,680. If these projections are accurate, death from disease could outpace mortality directly caused by Israel's aerial and ground warfare. It is important to remember here that these disease-related deaths would not be happening if Israel had not launched its war on Gaza. Disease and famine are very closely linked, and for a place to be declared a famine, high death rate from disease needs to be present.
Famine is usually seen as an episode of extreme hunger crisis in access to food associated with larger numbers of people dying from hunger and disease. Now, some 20 years ago, because of the lack of an agreed definition, food security experts came together to agree on a set of metrics. And what they came up with is called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification System, known as the IPC for short. And this measures the intensity of a famine in a particular area, and it has 5 phases, which are conveniently colored on maps. So green is normal, yellow is phase 2, which is stressed, orangey brown is phase 3, which is crisis, which is when humanitarian agencies start getting alarmed. Red is emergency. Now, in the original discussion, the question of defining famine at this stage was raised. And in emergency, children are already dying from hunger and disease. So you can have a large population in emergency, as in Yemen, as in South Sudan, with a huge death toll over many months and years, without the 5th stage, which is a dark blood red, famine actually being declared. Now, what we have in Gaza today is overwhelmingly emergency, with some very substantial proportion tipping over into the 5th phase, which is catastrophe and famine. But it's important to understand that even in emergency, significant numbers of children are dying of hunger and disease. It is already disastrous.
The general metric experts use for determining a famine is if there is at least 2 deaths per 10,000 a day from disease or hunger. About half of these deaths are of children. Apart from disease, the health impact of famine include both under and malnutrition. Both of these conditions of starvation lead to wasting, being underweight, and lacking vital nutrients, which in turn weakens the immune system. Diarrhea commonly accompanies starvation too. Part of the issue with treating victims of starvation is that there comes a point where the individual can no longer eat solid foods, or if they do, they will die. In most societies, where one person is extremely starved or malnutritioned, they are admitted to an intensive care unit in a hospital and restored to health through a treatment program, which gradually reintroduces liquids and builds up calorie intake. But for those in famine, this treatment is needed quickly and at a mass level.
You need therapeutic feeding, because if somebody who is in a state, adult or child, in a state of extreme malnutrition, if they're just given regular food just like that, it can be very dangerous. So they need therapeutic feeding for sufficient time that they can begin to regain their strength and health before they move on to a regular diet. So it's not just a question of the number of truckloads of food that can be brought in. It is the establishment of that entire infrastructure for the nutritional rehabilitation of an exceptionally stressed, undernourished population.
Without a ceasefire and a total lifting of the Israeli siege, infrastructure required to fight off famine will be severely restricted. Currently, there are no international laws obliging states to take action if a famine is declared or suspected, unlike the case with genocide. But there are a number of laws against forced starvation of a population. While there are no laws requiring countries to take action, sometimes the declaration of famine pressurizes countries to do so.
In Somalia in 2011, when 490,000 people were in famine conditions under the IPC scale, and some 250,000 died of starvation, the declaration of famine was the occasion on which the United States began to find a humanitarian workaround for restrictions on aid to Somalia, because a terrorist group, Al-Shabaab, was operating there in the areas where famine was occurring.
The impact a famine has is immense in both the immediate, medium and long term. Researchers examining the 1944 to 1945 Dutch winter famine, which was caused after the Nazi occupational forces decided to collectively punish the local population for being involved in resistance efforts, found that even after the famine was over, those who lived through it continued to experience health-related issues for the rest of their lives. Children who were in utero during the famine and born before or just after it had shorter lifespans than those born before or after it. This is despite the fact they had excellent access to food, medicine and other related items after famine ended, according to a 2013 Columbia University study. Other studies of fetuses during the Dutch famine revealed that when a fetus experiences malnutrition, it impacts the birth weight and health outcomes for the rest of their lives. Fetuses who experience pregnancy malnutrition during the first 3 months of pregnancy, but were well fed during the rest of it, were born of a normal weight. However, they experienced higher rates of obesity and other related illnesses than the general population. Fetuses who experienced malnutrition in the last few months of pregnancy were born underweight and remained small throughout their lifetime despite excellent access to food and nutrition. This suggests genetic changes may occur during a famine. Even people who are older at the time of the Dutch famine were impacted throughout their life. One of the most famous survivors of famine was Hollywood actress Audrey Hepburn, who was in her teens when the Dutch hunger ended. The Breakfast at Tiffany's star was famous for her slim figure. According to her family, she enjoyed a rich and varied diet including pasta, grains, chocolate, and ate a little bit of everything. Despite this, she weighed 110 pounds or 49 kilos, had a 22-inch waist, and throughout her life, people assumed she had an eating disorder. She suffered from a range of health problems, many of which are suspected to be linked to famine. Elsewhere, numerous research has shown children exposed to famine may suffer from stunted growth, meaning they are shorter than they would otherwise be. Beyond health challenges, the memory and trauma of famine leaves a lasting scar for generations.
Famine is also a massive social trauma. One of my legal colleagues at the Fletcher School at Tufts, Tom Dannenbaum, has called starvation siege a crime of societal torture. And what he means by that is that as people are forced to do anything they can to survive, just to get food and the essentials, they're required to violate important social taboos and practices. They cannot pursue all those normal social activities, maintain those social bonds that keep a family or society together. And historians who studied the memory of famines in the past, for example, those who studied starvation in Ireland in the 1840s, or indeed concentration camp survivors after World War II, people such as Primo Levi. What they describe is everyone being reduced to thieves and being incredibly selfish. So imagine if you have some food and you are preparing it for your own children, but there's an equally hungry family next door, and you don't share it with them, and the feeling of shame, of humiliation, of not being able to extend the most basic human gesture is profoundly humiliating and shaming. And this is a trauma that lives with people for their lives. In fact, it's an intergenerational trauma too. It took several generations for there to be public commemoration of the Great Hunger in Ireland.
To date, dozens of Palestinians have died of malnutrition as a result of the famine in the Strip, with rights groups warning that many more fatalities may have taken place without being accounted for because of people's inability to reach medical centres and seek help. The situation in the enclave is getting worse every day as Israel continues its deliberate siege and bombing campaign, which restricts and targets aid convoys. If action isn't taken to stop this, Palestinians face generations of hardship, medical problems, the disintegration of society, and a catastrophe far worse than anything we've seen to date.
On July 22nd, the International Court of Justice, by a vote of 11-4, declared that Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, nearly 60 years old, was illegal under international law, and that it should come to an end, quote, as rapidly as possible, end quote. This was one of the most significant rulings by the International Court of Justice since Israel's occupation began in June of 1967. Our second report features Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! She reviews the salient points of the decision and then interviews Palestinian human rights activist and attorney Diana Buttu, who explains the legal and political ramifications of the ICJ decision.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show in The Hague, where the International Court of Justice has ruled Israel's occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem as illegal, should come to an end, quote, as rapidly as possible, unquote. Israel's illegal military occupation of the territories began in 1967, has since forcefully expanded, killing and displacing thousands of Palestinians. ICJ presiding judge Nawaf Salam read the non-binding legal opinion Friday, deeming Israel's presence in the territories illegal.
Israel must immediately cease all new settlement activity. Israel also has an obligation to repeal all legislation and measures creating or maintaining the unlawful situation, including those which discriminate against the Palestinian people and the occupied Palestinian territory, as well as all measures aimed at modifying the demographic composition of any parts of the territory. Israel is also under an obligation to provide full reparations for the damage caused by its internationally wrongful acts to all natural or legal persons concerned.
The court also said other nations are obligated not to legally recognize Israel's decades-long occupation of the territories and, quote, not to render aid or assistance, unquote, to the occupation. The 15-judge panel said Israel has no right to sovereignty of the territories and pointed to a number of Israeli actions, such as the construction and violent expansion of illegal Israeli settlements across West Bank and East Jerusalem, the forced permanent control over Palestinian lands, and discriminatory policies against Palestinians, all violations of international law, they said. The Palestinian Foreign Minister, Riyad al-Maliki, praised Friday's ruling.
All states and the UN are now under obligation not to recognize the legality of Israel's presence in the occupied Palestinian territory and to do nothing to assist Israel in maintaining this illegal situation. They are directed by the court to bring Israel's illegal occupation to an end. This means all states and the UN must immediately review their bilateral relations with Israel to ensure their policies do not aid in Israel's continued aggression against the Palestinian people, whether directly or indirectly. يجب على جميع الدول الآن.
All states must now fulfill their clear obligations. No aid, no collusion, no money, no weapons, no trade, nothing with Israel.
In 2022, the UN General Assembly issued a resolution tasking the International Court of Justice with determining whether the Israeli occupation amounted to annexation. This all comes as the ICJ is also overseeing an ongoing genocide case against Israel filed by South Africa, and as the International Criminal Court is seeking arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Despite mounting outcry over Israel's war on Gaza, which has killed some 39,000 Palestinians, more than 16,000 of them children, Netanyahu is set to travel to Washington, D.C. to address a joint session of Congress Wednesday. For more, we go to Brussels, Belgium, where we're joined by Diana Buttu, Palestinian human rights attorney, former advisor to the negotiating team of the Palestine Liberation Organization. Thank you so much for being with us. Diana, first respond to this court ruling, since it is non-binding. What is the significance of it?
Even though it's non-binding, Amy, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have any weight. It simply means that Israel's going to ignore it. But what it does set is it sets out the legal precedent for other countries, and those other countries do have to respect the opinion of the highest court, the highest international court. And so what we see with this decision is that it's a very important and a very necessary one, because we see the court makes it clear not only that Israel's occupation is illegal, but it also says that all countries around the world have an obligation to make sure that Israel doesn't get away with it, that they have an obligation to make sure that this occupation comes to an end. And this is very important because over the years, and in particular over the past 30 years, we've seen a shift in international diplomacy to try to push Palestinians to somehow give up their rights. And here we have the highest international court saying that that isn't the case, and that in fact it's up to Israel to end its military occupation, and it's up to the international community to make sure that Israel does that.
And exactly what is the extended decision when it comes to how other countries should deal with Israel at this point?
Well, there were some very interesting elements to this case. The first is that the court comes out very clearly and not just says that the occupation is illegal, but they also say that the settlements have to go and the settlers have to go. They also say that Palestinians have a right to return. Now, we're talking about over 300,000 Palestinians who were expelled in 1967, and another probably about 200,000 Palestinians who have never been able to return back. We're just talking about the West Bank and Gaza Strip because of Israel's discriminatory measures. The other thing that the court says is that it's not just the West Bank and East Jerusalem that are occupied, but also Gaza as well. And this is a very important ruling because for so many years, Israel has tried to blur the lines and make it seem as though they're not an occupation of Gaza, which they are. And so what this requires is that the international community not only not recognize the occupation, but that they take into account measures, or they take measures to make sure that Israel stops its occupation. That means everything from arms embargo to sanctions on Israel, anything that is necessary that can be done to make sure that Israel's occupation finally comes to an end. And this is where we now see that instead of the world telling Palestinians that they just have to negotiate a resolution with their occupier, with their abuser, that the ball is now in their court. It's up to the international community now to put sanctions on Israel to end this military occupation.
I wanted to ask you about what's happening right now in Gaza. You've got the deaths. It's expected to be well over 39,000. But you also have this new report by Oxfam that finds Israel's used water as a weapon of war, with Gaza's water supplies plummeting 94% since October 7th and the nonstop Israeli bombardment, even before their access was extremely limited. And then you have this catastrophic situation where you have because of the destruction of Gaza's water treatment plants, forcing people to resort to sewage-contaminated water containing pathogens that lead to diarrhea, especially deadly for kids, diseases like cholera, dysentery, hepatitis A, and typhoid. Meanwhile, the Israeli army has started to vaccinate the Israeli soldiers after Palestinian health authorities said a high concentration of the polio virus has been found in sewage samples from Gaza. It's taking place, the vaccination program of soldiers across Israel in the coming weeks. The significance of this, Diana.
This is precisely what we've been talking about, which is that Israel is carrying out genocide. They know that they're carrying out genocide, and we don't see that anybody is stopping Israel in carrying out this genocide. So here now we have yet another International Court of Justice ruling. This one, the previous ones are actually binding, saying that Israel has to take all measures to stop this genocide. And yet we just simply don't see that the world has put into place measures to sanction Israel, to isolate Israel, to punish Israel. Instead, it gets to to do whatever it wants. But there is something very important as well, which is that Israel somehow believes that it's going to be immune, that somehow this polio or all of these diseases aren't going to boomerang back into Israeli society. They will. And the issue here now is whether we're going to see some very robust action on the part of the international community now that we have a number of decisions from the ICJ saying to Israel that it's got to stop and that this genocide must come to end. Israel must pay a price for continuing this genocide.
Diana Buttu, I wanted to end by asking you about Netanyahu coming here. The Center for Constitutional Rights tweeted, "Before Netanyahu lands in D.C., we demand the Justice Department investigate him for genocide, war crimes, and torture in Gaza. Nearly 40K killed, including more than 14,000 children, 90,000 injured, 2 million displaced, an entire population subject to starvation. This cannot go unanswered." If you can talk about the significance of Netanyahu addressing a joint session of Congress, also it's expected that the person who President Biden has said he is supporting as he steps aside to run for president, Kamala Harris, is expected to be meeting with Netanyahu, and what you'd like to see happen here.
You know, it's repugnant to me to be hearing that a war criminal, a person who has flattened Gaza, who said that he was going to flatten Gaza, who's issued orders to kill more than 40,000, upwards of 190,000 Palestinians. We still don't know the numbers, who has made life in Gaza unlivable, who's using Palestinians as human pinballs, telling them to move from one area to the next, who's presiding over a genocide, and unabashedly so. It's going to be shocking to see the number of applause and rounds of applause and the standing ovations that this man is going to be receiving. It very much signals exactly where the United States is, which is complicit in this genocide. And Palestinians know this. If anything, he should have not received an invitation. He should simply be getting a warrant for his arrest, not be receiving applause and accolades in Congress.
Diana Buttu, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Palestinian human rights attorney joining us from Brussels, Belgium. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for a director of development to lead our fundraising team. You can learn more and apply at democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder-Shroof of Dokadus, Messiah Rhodes, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Tarasena, Tammy Warnoff, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alcoff, Taymouri Astudillo, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Masood, and Hannah Elias. Our executive director is Julie Crosby. Special thanks to Becca Stelly, John Randolph, Paul Powell, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Hugh Grant, Dennis Moynihan, David Prude, Dennis McCormick. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.
The ICJ's ruling on the illegality of Israel's occupation, as Diana Buttu noted in our previous segment, also found that Israel's Jewish-only settlements in the occupied West Bank, which would include East Jerusalem, are also illegal. There are approximately 700,000 Israeli Jews who live in these illegal settlements, colonies really. And according to a report by Oxford University, released in 2015, as many as 60,000 of these settlers have American citizenship. Our third report is a documentary film titled Israel's Foreign Army, and it investigates the presence of these American citizens in Israel's illegal settlements and also the role they play in Israel's military activities in the occupied West Bank.
Since October 7, 2023, Israeli military raids and settler violence has surged in the occupied West Bank. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed and thousands injured. More than a dozen countries, including the US, have condemned the violence. The White House has even announced sanctions against several Israeli settlers. But tens of thousands of Americans live in illegal settlements, and many serve in the Israeli military. People in Power investigates the role US citizens play in Israel's occupation and settlement expansion.
חיילינו הגיבורים חייבים לשמוע את הקריאה שלנו בעזה.
Hundreds of Israelis are attending this pro-war rally in Jerusalem, supporting the bombardment of Gaza of far-right settlers and American dual nationals.
Since October the 7th, there has been a spike in violence carried out by Israeli settlers against Palestinians, and as a result, the United States has said that they will impose visa restrictions on those carrying out the violence. But some Palestinians say that this doesn't go far enough because the relationship between the United States, the occupation, and settlers runs deep.
ראש הממשלה והקבינט המלחמה חייבים לשמוע את הקריאה והדרישה שלנו לניצחון מוחלט. אויבינו הרבים חייבים לשמוע ולהבין שעם ישראל ינצח וישמיד את כל מי שינסה לפגוע בו. ניצחון! ניצחון!
In February 2024, after mounting pressure, US President Joe Biden issued an executive order sanctioning 4 Israeli settlers accused of violence and intimidation against Palestinians. Since then, more settlers and settlements have been added to the list. But the US remains Israel's closest political ally and continues to give it more military aid than any other country in the world.
Mr. President, you're meeting with our united war cabinet to lead Israel to victory.
Israel has the right, and I would add a responsibility, to respond to the slaughter of their people. And we will ensure Israel has what it needs to defend itself against these terrorists.
If you could describe the relationship between the United States and Israel in one sentence, what would you say?
Let's get Trump back in because
let's keep this broader.
Okay,
let's keep it broader.
I'm going to say that.
We need the support of both parties. They have to start thinking a little bit more like the enemies. I mean, the United States and Great Britain, their forces are being shot at in the Middle East also. And what, are they going to let that happen? We have to draw the line and say enough. They don't understand restraint. They don't understand negotiation. They understand force and power. So you smack them, punch them in the face, and knock them down.
It's a different mentality in the Middle East. We have children who are fighting for the IDF, and that puts us in a little different position as well.
Since the Hamas attack on October 7th, when at least 1,139 were killed and 240 people taken hostage, Israel has carried out one of the most intensive bombing campaigns against a populated area in history, so far killing at least 33,482 people and displacing 85% of the population.
There's been a lot of coverage about accusations of war crimes that have been committed by members of the Israeli forces. Do you think that is an issue there for American dual nationals to be in an army that has this accusation put against them?
The Israelis, we're accused of war crimes whether we commit them or not. We have suffered so many more losses of our guys and of our men and women in battle because we don't go in and carpet bomb the way they think we do. Why should that building, it's a death trap, why should we send our guys in there? Just knock it down, knock it down.
לא עוצרים עד שמנצחים. לא עוצרים עד שמנצחים.
Human rights groups accuse the Israeli military of collective punishment, arbitrary executions, torture, and starvation. Israel continues to blame Hamas for its actions, while the US vetoed multiple calls by the UN for a ceasefire. And despite Biden's executive order, Palestinians living under occupation say they face increasing restrictions on movement, while settlers accused of violence enjoy near impunity. Settlers are Israeli citizens who live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Palestinian territory which has been occupied by Israel since 1967. There are now around 700,000 settlers. The 3 million Palestinians there are ruled under military law. Since October 7th, more than 430 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli soldiers or settlers in the occupied West Bank. 29-year-old Zakaria Al-Adra lives in Msafariyata, a collection of Palestinian villages which have faced years of attacks and systematic forced displacement by Israeli settlers and the military. On the 13th of October, a settler shot him in the stomach. He now has trouble walking and eating and is in constant pain. There's a cell phone video of the attack.
يعني 7 شهر يوم الحرب صار المستوطن ماخذ زي يستخدم زي كأنه جندي، يلبس عبس جيش ويطلع على البيوت يسوي مشاكل مع الناس، أي واحد يعترض ويطخه عادي. شي منطقة زي الأول الحرية فيها. هو حامل سلاحه في ايده هيك ماشي. ضربني بسلاحه هون، اطلق النار وطخني في صدر من المنطقة هذه.
Can you describe that moment? Did you know what was happening to you?
الرصاص اللي طخه يعني مش رصاص عادي، يعني كمان الرصاص الدمدم هذا اسمه بنفجر فجر. ضرب فانا في عظام صدري من تحت وانفجر. بالخشين 3 بيطلع منه شفرات، خشين جوا بطني من هون. أنا حطيت إيدي على بطني من يوم ما هو أطلق النار، كانت فتحة 9 سنتي.
وش صار ورا طقوك؟ وقعت للقاع؟
وقعت على الأرض، يعني أنا ما كنت شايف، يعني بعدين شفت الدنيا كلها سمرة، يعني أنا مش شايف ولا شيء الحين. بعاني شوي، أنا امبارح روحت من المستشفى الساعة، في المستشفى 82 يوم، أنا ما شفت أطفالي من مرة. يعني مصدق أخذ ثقة خلاص، أخذ حريته إنه هذا بيشتغل بده إياه الحين.
Zakaria says the shooter came from the direction of Havat Ma'on, an illegal outpost in the southern Hebron Hills. Rights groups say it has a history of violent harassment of Palestinians, yet according to recent media reports, has received private US funding. This isn't uncommon. US residents have funneled millions of dollars of tax-deductible donations into illegal settlements, which violate international law and play a significant role in the expulsion of Palestinians from their land. Around 20 kilometres north is Hebron City, one of the starkest symbols of the occupation. It's home to around 200,000 Palestinians and 1,000 settlers. Hagit Ofran monitors settlements and their expansion for Israeli campaign group Peace Now.
In order to protect this small group of settlers inside a Palestinian city, the Israeli army sealed a whole neighborhood from the presence of Palestinians. The heart of the old city, where you had all the shops, are closed for 30 years already for Palestinians. And there are parts of the streets that they are not even allowed to walk. Since October 7, the whole area became even more restricted. For instance, as I was walking up here, I saw a Palestinian house where the roof of it is taken as a military post.
What, so they just take over the roof of their home and...
They have a military order, it's called the seizure order, and the commander say, I need this property for the security of the area, and I take it temporarily.
So this family has to eat, sleep, go about their day while there is an occupying force on their roof?
Sometimes it's not only on the roof, sometimes it can be in the next room. All of it is for the security needs.
Suddenly, our interview is interrupted. So every time we do an interview, we're met with soldiers.
They are sent here, I believe, to check if we are a threat or whatever.
I need to see your ID, please.
You have authorization from the Israeli government to be here?
They know that we're here.
It's okay that you're telling me, but we need authorization.
Yeah, but I'm just, as well, just so you know.
Tell the guy here not to film us.
If they sent here terrorists from Al Jazeera, we have to make sure you're not.
Where's your accent from?
Michigan.
Michigan, okay. After checking our documents, they finally left. What was really interesting is I just spoke to one of the soldiers and he told me that he was from Michigan and a dual national. How many of these settlements that you're talking about are funded by US residents?
We cannot really know how much money is going directly from funds or charities, American charities, to settlements. There are many settlements that get funds from charities in America. You can also look at, the Americans give Israel X amount of billions for our security, so it frees X amount of billions for other causes for Israel. So you can say that it's indirectly support the settlements.
Do you think that there's any desire to try and limit people living on land that is deemed illegal internationally?
I don't see this still in the United States, any big opposition to the very settlements. What we saw is like the first step, and I think it's not insignificant. It is an important step, and it puts a lot of political pressure within Israel, and it's bringing the issue of settler violence to the headlines in Israel, which is something very, very significant. But of course, this will not end the occupation.
The soldier we met isn't the only American in the West Bank. According to a study by Oxford University released in 2015, 60,000 settlers living in the occupied Palestinian territory are also American citizens. They're playing a significant role in enforcing the occupation. As we travelled through the city to meet Palestinians, we witnessed just how difficult it was to move around. There are many Israeli checkpoints. Some denied us entry.
We're trying to find a different route to get to the Palestinian that lives in this area of Hebron. Hi.
Can we see the IDs, please? Yes. How do you guys get in? Through the gate over there?
Yeah. Is that an issue? So this is the situation in Hebron now. There's a lot of security and it's very difficult to move around.
Because over there it's called the red area.
But there's no signs on the gate. There's literally none.
I'm telling you.
مرحبا هاي تمام اهلا وسهلا.
This is Isa Amro. He lives on the other side over here. He's a local resident of Hebron. Told us that he was attacked after October the 7th. He's now trying to communicate with the Israeli soldiers to see if we can pass through.
אני יודע מותר לעיתונאים ייכנסו מתמר.
מותר לעיתונאים שהם אזרחים זרים, מי שלא גר פה ואין לו תעודת לעם הוא לא יכול להיכנס.
ויש להם פספורט.
בסדר, איסה יודע הכל, הוא יודע את כל הנהלים, הוא מכיר את הכל.
הוא היה עסוק, לא ענה לי בטלפון.
אז פעם הבאה דבר עם איסה, הוא יודע את כל הנהלים, הוא מכיר כבר את הכל.
We didn't expect this to be the first meeting, sorry.
This is the reality. This is how the life.
Yeah.
أهلا وسهلا.
أهلا وسهلا. شلونك? So this is the reality of Hebron.
I am living here since almost 17, 18 years.
You literally have to get through a dozen soldiers just to get to your home. And people can't just come and visit
Nobody
you.
can come to visit me. Only the people who are living inside the area are allowed to come here. So this is an occupied Palestinian land by the Israeli settlers, and they usually attack Palestinian families here and here. They attacked us.
Isa Amro says that on October 7th, he was attacked and detained by both settlers and Israeli soldiers, and that in the days after his release, he was also forced out of his home for weeks. We put Isa's claims to the Israeli military, but we didn't hear back.
I was tortured. I was almost killed. I was coming from here to my house, the way you came, and settlers in an army uniform, who are my neighbors, I was kidnapped by them. I was kept for 10 hours, handcuffed, blindfolded, gagged, beaten, sexually assaulted. They pointed the gun and they put it on my head and count to 10. I fainted 2 times without any medical treatment. Spitting at me, saying many bad things to me. They were celebrating, torturing me for 10 hours continuously.
And you thought you were going to die?
I said goodbye to everything. I thought that it's my last moment.
And recently we've been hearing from the United States, from some European countries, that they are going to impose visa restrictions on settlers who were convicted of carrying out attacks. What did you think when you heard this?
I can say that it's a kind of public opinion satisfaction. The settlers who are attacking Palestinians are only 4 now in the West Bank. There are 10 Palestinians killed by settlers directly. Where are they? And many American citizens here, there are many American citizens, they live here illegally inside Hebron as settlers. They should take them to American courts and treat them as war criminals. To be very honest, they should be brought to the ICC. Nobody was accountable for what happened to me and to many other Palestinians. And the settlers are not the only one who are attacking Palestinians, the Israeli soldiers who are settlers in an army uniform. There are many settlers joined the army and they kill Palestinians. If you want really to make them accountable, make Israel accountable. The settlers, they are backed up by the Israeli government. They are supported by the Israeli government. They are financed by the Israeli government. So let's go after the Israeli government and stop them and dismantle all the Israeli settlements according to the international law.
The White House recently reversed Donald Trump's policy on Israel's settlement expansion, declaring them inconsistent with international law. Yet organizations like the One Israel Fund, an American not-for-profit exempt from federal tax, claims it's raised millions of dollars for settlements.
Hamas sent us a message on October 7th. Never again is now.
One of its prominent ambassadors is Gabriel Boxer, who regularly promotes and fundraises for settlements and Israeli soldiers.
Boom shakalaka!
In February, he also accompanied the Israeli military as it bombed Gaza.
Wow, that's all I can say. Right behind me is hostile enemy territory that we learned what really they believe after October 7th.
We are now approaching the cave of the Machpelah. This huge structure is the burial place of the patriarchs and matriarchs of the Jewish people.
It's also a holy site for Muslims, the Ibrahimi Mosque. In order to get around the region's strict military control, we met with David, an American-Israeli tour guide.
So what do you say to those in America who say that there should be more sanctions on even the funding of settlements by private US residents?
I think that the people who claim that they support the Palestinians are not aware of the facts on the ground, are either being fed misinformation intentionally or imagining events that are not actually happening.
David takes us to Ma'al Haver. It's rare access to a highly secured and gated settlement, which has received donations from the One Israel Fund. Around 700 settlers live in this sprawling suburban-style luxury community. We're met by Gideon Ariel, an American-Israeli settler who's lived here for 11 years.
Different places. Here's my home.
Oh,
watch your head when you pass by the flag that my kids put up.
I'll let you lead the way.
This is the view that sold me on Ma'aleh Hever. My wife has a cousin who lives here, and we would come from time to time for the holidays. And one day her husband took me outside and said, "You see this house next door? You can have it for 250,000 shekels," which was a pittance in the time.
Why is it important to live in a community like this?
Well, first of all, why is it important to live anywhere? A person lives where they want to live. And this is, as you can see, a beautiful place. Historically, God promised Abraham, this is the land that is going to belong to you and to your children forevermore. Right here in my backyard. Well, it's Shabbat. Tomorrow is Shabbat. So my wife, Devra, here is preparing for Shabbat. Devra, Boker Tov.
Are you also American? Yes. Every time I hear an American accent, it's like
What's going on?
Yeah.
Where am I? We have people here from all different places of the world. We have people here from United States, from Russia, from India, from Germany, from Ethiopia. You name it, in just a small community of 100 families.
There's going to be people watching
Yeah.
who are going to say, what the hell is an American doing in this land?
Because they are all Jews. We are all Jews who were exiled from this land about 2,000 years ago. We kept that connection to the land all throughout those millennium. And now, thanks to God, we are coming back to our land.
If the United Nations says that there has been a significant increase in attacks from settlers, and then also, as this area is called by the United Nations, an occupation that is illegal under the Geneva Convention, then it is only right for the United States to take action. How do you respond to that?
It is not illegal for me to raise my children here. I'm not bothering anybody else. This land never belonged to anybody else. It was always state land. We're going to decide what's best for us. We've established a state which is thriving, which is helping people all over the world, and nobody's going to tell us what we can do or what we can't do. I'm sorry.
Israeli rights groups say part of the settlement is built on private Palestinian land. In August, around 500 meters away, settlers from an unknown location, armed with M16 rifles, were filmed physically assaulting a Palestinian farmer.
How would you feel about potentially having Palestinians live here?
This specific community is a small community and it wants to stay a small community. And we're also all religious Jews over here.
So not here, but in other places?
Yeah, in general. However, it's very important that Jews stay the majority, and even though we believe in democracy, very much so, we believe in the only place for Jews to live and call it their own.
The UN describes settlements and the displacement of Palestinians as a major obstacle to peace in the region. At the heart of this obstacle are American citizens and groups like the One Israel Fund. One of the settlers accused of violence and sanctioned by both the US and the UK is Bar Yusuf, shown here on the One Israel Fund website, thanking them for donating a drone.
These are the guys who are really responsible for preventing terror and saving lives and fighting the bad guys.
Funding is often used to support Israeli paramilitary groups with surveillance equipment like drones, vehicles and helmets.
Missing a lot of equipment they needed before, but now, because of all the donations, they've been able to receive a lot of stuff they wanted.
And thank God we will be improving the security of all Judea and Samaria, so thank you all.
Thank you very much.
In the US, there's increasing pressure to explicitly ban the funding of settlements by groups like the One Israel Fund, who did not respond to our repeated requests for comment. For now, American dollars continue to fund settlements and soldiers, while Palestinians like Asa bear the brunt of the occupation.
There is a drone up here just now. Do you think they know we're doing an interview? What is this?
Israeli settlers, they have drones to film us, to intimidate us, to spy on us, and now it's only on us.
So they're filming us?
They are filming us now. It happens almost every day. Whenever I have visitors, I have journalists who are here, it's a kind of that we are watching you.
What do you think America needs to do?
America needs to work hard to punish the Israeli government, to punish the Israeli settlers' leaders, and to punish the Israeli settlement organizations and NGOs, and even to start with themselves first, to stop the $3.8 billion aid to the Israeli military every year, and make it conditional on ending the Israeli occupation and ending the Israeli settler violence and ending the Israeli apartheid here. And they should start with their own people to stop them from funding the Israeli settlers' terrorists here. It's really important that this should start first in their own countries according to their legal system.
That's our program. Thank you as always for watching. We'll see you soon.